Next up, let's talk about the muscular system. Okay. So first, let's talk about peripheral circulatory assistance. As you know, we have a vast network of veins and arteries that carry blood throughout the body. The veins and arteries that exist outside the chest and abdomen. So, for example, in the arms, legs, etc. Basically, your appendages, right, outside of this like torso region. And this is called the peripheral vascular system, or the PVS. As these are fairly far from the heart, they require some assistance from the muscular system to efficiently pump that blood back, right? The heart is really strong pump, really strong muscle. It just pumps, and the blood goes from the heart, and then it just goes out. But as it goes out, it also obviously loses power, right? As it goes farther and farther out, it loses more and more power. And especially when you're talking about the veins, which, remember, arteries away from the heart, veins going back to the heart. The veins have already lost most of the power, especially in this peripheral system, which is far from the chest and abdomen. So you need a little bit of help to kind of have enough force to send it right back to the heart without any problems. The contraction of muscles in your arms and appendages, whatever, is crucial for this movement of blood through the venous system back to the heart, right? Next, and again, this is to prevent like things like pooling or whatever else in your blood, right? When you don't move your body for a long time. Next, let's talk about thermoregulation using our muscles. So normally when muscles contract, they always release some of the energy consumed as heat. Normally, this is considered a waste, as we want this energy doing work for our muscles and not just leaving in the form of heat. If you remember from, or if you learn from thermodynamics, not all in a machine, not all of the energy released by the machine will be doing work, right, as intended. So machines have like a certain efficiency, how much of the energy from this machine or from the system actually does work. For our bodies and for our muscles, it's also like a machine. It's not 100%. And according to physics, no machine can be 100% efficient, where all the energy goes directly to work. Our bodies are no exception. When our muscles release energy, or when our muscles like do anything, some of the energy that's supposed to be doing work is actually lost in the form of heat. Usually that's kind of like the waste product, and we want to reduce that as much as possible. However, there is a situation in which actually we try and use this, and we actually want to increase this percentage of heat release, and we want to release as much heat as possible, and that's when we're trying to warm up our body in response to cold. And what we do is we undergo a process called shivering, which I'm sure many of you have heard before. When shivering, the muscles begin to repeatedly contract and relax with the goal of releasing as much energy in the form of heat as possible. Now, this waste product of heat is actually now the main product of the goal, right? When you move your muscles really, really fast, a lot, you'll release, your muscles will be moving, so you'll be doing a lot of work, but you'll also be releasing a lot of this heat as a byproduct. And that's heat is what we're exactly looking for, and that heat will be released into our bodies and thus warm us up. The shivering process is an automatic response to low body temperature, meaning it's kind of like an instinct, and it's controlled by the automatic nervous system, which is present mostly in older children and adults. The reason that's important is that infants and young children have not developed this response yet, and so they actually have a large supply of brown fat, which is different from the white fat that we have. Mostly the white fat that we have very low brown fat. But young infants and children have a larger amount of brown fat, and the brown fat, when it burns the energy, like normal fat, when you use it up and burn it, it's mostly used up it's mostly all used up. Whereas brown fat releases a lot of heat when it's burned. It's not very efficient, but again, in this case, that's what we're looking for. And the elderly begin to lose this response with age. So for them, they actually don't have brown fat, so they actually have like struggle a lot more with the cold, right? As you get older, you struggle a lot more with the cold, and you need a warmer environment to live in, because you can't regulate your body temperature that well anymore because you lose, for example, the shivering response, among other things. The response is initiated when we are faced with external cold, like in the winter, obviously, but it's also present during illness, and that's what we call chills or rigors or something like that. Because during illness, our body's goal temperature increases. So, for example, the normal temperature is, our internal body temperature is 98.6. Our body right now, for me, I'm not sick. My body says, okay, I want a goal of 98.6. Now it checks, what's my body temperature right now? Okay, it's 96, right? So it's like, I'm a little bit under the goal. So that means I need to heat up a little bit to get to 98.6. So it activates all of these automatic responses, include one of which might be shivering, and that releases more heat, and my body goes up to the 98.6 that it's set as the goal. And once it does that, it's like, okay, we're good. I just have to maintain it, no, nothing is required. Now imagine I immediately right now just got sick and developed a fever and had a bunch of pyrogens released in my system, and I became like sick with the fever and chills. What would happen is my actual temperature right now doesn't change, right? When you have a fever, your actual body temperature doesn't change. What changes is actually the goal. Instead of this 98.6, your body actually raises the goal temperature to, like, say 105, right? It says now my new goal is 105, and then it looks again. Okay, the goal is 105, but right now I have 98. So that means I must be kind of cold. I need to warm up, right? And so it now actually again triggers this shivering response among other responses to warm you up and get you up to 105, right? Because that's the new goal. And that's why when you have a fever, even though you're actually really hot, because you're probably at like 100, which is higher than you normally should be, but it's still under what your body wants you to be, which is like 105. So that's why you still feel really cold, because your body's telling you you're underneath the goal body temperature. You're cold. You need to warm up, even though you're actually physically warmer than you should be. Okay. And again, that's just kind of explained in this, right? Okay, now let's talk about the main thing of muscles, which is fiber types. Our muscles are made up of, it's not just like one long muscle, it's not like one string and that's your whole bicep. Our muscles are made up of a network of fibers that all work together. These fibers come in 3 variations, and different muscles have different ratios, compositions of these fibers, right? The percent of each fiber in each muscle is going to be completely different. The types are type 1, which is called slow oxidative, has weak contractions, it's very resistant to fatigue, meaning you have a lot of stamina and it doesn't get tired very easily, has many mitochondria in it, and the fibers are very small usually. And the oxidative refers to that it uses oxygen and it uses oxidative means of getting more energy. There's type 2A, which is fast oxidative. Again, this uses oxidative methods of getting energy, and so again, it requires oxygen. It has high contractions or stronger contractions, faster contractions. That's what the slow and fast mean. So stronger and faster contractions, but it fatigues more quickly, has less stamina. It has a medium amount of mitochondria, so not as many as the type 1, but still some mitochondria, and the fibers are much larger than the type 1 fibers, like physically larger. And then there's finally type 2B, which is fast glycolytic. This glycolytic refers to the fact that it does not use oxygen, does not use any oxidative means to get more energy. It just uses glucose, right? Only glucose and nothing else. This has the strongest and fastest contractions out of all, but it also fatigues the quickest. It runs out of energy the quickest. And that's because getting energy just straight off of glucose is very difficult, and you won't have a lot of energy if you just use glucose, but it's very fast. You can get a lot of energy very quickly from glucose, but in the long term, you're not going to get that much energy from glucose compared to oxidative means. because it also doesn't use any oxidative means, like, for example, doesn't undergo the Krebs cycle or ATP synthase or anything like that, or electron transport chain, doesn't need that many mitochondria, so has the least amount of mitochondria. And again, the fibers themselves are physically really large. The fiber composition of different muscles in our body varies greatly. So the composition of your bicep, your pectoral, and your eyelids are very different. But the fiber composition in the same muscle between different people also varies greatly based on genetics and training. For example, the bicep muscle in me and somebody like a professional athlete would vary very greatly in terms of what we have. And even among athletes, varies very greatly based on both what type of training they do, so what kind of sport they play, what kind of sport they're trained for, as well as just what are their genetics. Okay, so type 1 fibers are found predominantly in muscles that are always active, like, for example, the diaphragm and the muscles of endurance athletes. For example, marathon runners, long distance swimmers, long distance cyclers, etc. These are muscles that you don't really need that much like explosive, like fast, strong contraction, but you need to be contracting very, very, very for a very, very long time. The diaphragm, as well as like the legs, arms, body of like runners, long distance runners and swimmers, needs to be active for a very, very long period of time. Compare that to type 2 fibers, which predominantly compose muscles that need fast and accurate and strong contractions, like, for example, your eyes. Your eyes need to be able to move very fast to track things. Your eyes need to be able to see everything. They need to contract very fast. So your eyes use predominantly type 2 fibers. Like I think 80 to 90% is type 2 fibers, as well as the arms and legs and other muscles of power athletes. So power lifters, sprinters, etc. People who have explosive and like very strong and fast contractions for a very short period of time, but they don't need it for a very long period of time. So for example, power lifters who only are lifting one thing for like maybe 5 seconds, but they need to lift a lot. Or sprinters who need to run for like a minute, but they need to run very, very fast for that 1 minute. And you can actually see this actually physically. Remember that type 1 fibers are much smaller than type 2 fibers. So here you have comparison of a men's marathon runner and a men's sprinter. And if you want to just look at their leg muscles, both of them are very physically fit, obviously, because they do this sport professionally. But if you just look at the pictures, this guy's legs look much more muscular and much stronger than this man on the left, the marathon runner. But the marathon runner's muscles are actually also very, very well defined and very strong, but they're strong for a different way. So they're much smaller because the majority of his legs is type 1 fibers, because he needs mostly type 1 fibers in order to be able to run 26 miles very fast, right? He needs to not burn out after like the first minute, so he needs to have a lot of type 1 fibers, which are typically tend to be smaller, and so his legs look a lot smaller in terms of size compared to the sprinter, whose muscles are much larger, but that's because he actually has mostly type 2 fibers, which are useful, obviously, for sprinting for his sport, right? So they both have a high amount of muscle and very well-defined muscles, but for just different sports, for different activities, different compositions, because they need different functions, essentially. Okay. All right, so muscle energy sources. As mentioned, the energy sources from muscles come from either oxygen or solely glucose. Oxygen is the most efficient way to create energy, as one run of glycolysis Krebs cycle will produce much more ATP per glucose molecule than simply glycolysis, which we talked about many times before. For this, you need an abundance of oxygen coming into the cells. The oxygen can only come in from the lungs and must be transported to the muscles by the blood. There's no other way to get oxygen into your muscles because you can't like breathe in through your skin. At least humans can. Some animals can't. Thus, when undergoing heavy exercise, breathing rate and heart rate increase dramatically so that you can get more oxygen from the air into your lungs and then from your lungs to your muscles very quickly. Without it, the muscles will fatigue and fail to contract as ATP is required for muscle contraction, and ATP is mostly made from oxidative purposes such as the Krebs cycle. And again, for this, an abundance of mitochondria is also required as it so that more oxygen glucose can be used simultaneously without a bottleneck. Imagine if you had 100 molecules of glucose with all of the oxygen and everything you need to run through all 100 Krebs cycles at once, but you only had one mitochondria, and you know Krebs cycle runs in mitochondria, so the mitochondria takes in one glucose and oxygen at a time and runs through them. It's going to be very slow. It's going to be a huge bottleneck. So you need a lot of mitochondria so you can run a lot of Krebs cycles at the same time. Okay, makes sense?